Boston does an about-face on schools, shutting the doors just a couple of weeks after bringing students back. Tonight's second and final presidential debate, and Quibi is shutting down. So what went wrong? Here's what you need to know. Good morning, this is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Thursday, October 22nd. I'm Jill Wagner with Carlo Versano. Hey, Carlo.
Hey, Wags. How are you today?
Good. For anyone who's watching this and not just listening, I'm like sitting at the kids' table here. For some reason, I'm much lower than Carlo visually here, so I don't know what's going on.
Watch us on. It's a good reminder to plug our YouTube page. You can watch these podcasts if you are so inclined. You can see us in living color.
All right, Carlo, let's get to it and start with the state of the country's public schools. Boston's public school system going entirely remote as of today after the city's test positivity rate hit 5.7%. The superintendent of schools says students will be remote until there is a downward trend. And it comes after San Francisco's school superintendent said public schools won't reopen before the end of the year. Even though the city's positivity rate is just 0.88%.
What the heck is going on in San Francisco? I mean, look, the Boston school system, I think you can make an argument that they should even stay open even with a close to 6% positivity rate in that school, in that city rather. But to keep schools closed in San Francisco, a major public school district where the test positivity rate is below 1%, has stayed below 1%. It's among the lowest in the state of California. I don't understand what is wrong with the people who are running that city. I mean, the part that really gets me really upset, Jill, is there are private schools in San Francisco and they can apply for waivers to reopen, and they're doing just that, right? So what's going to happen? You're going to have what is already probably the most inequitable city in America, now effectively having two educational systems where the public school kids are, at home on Zoom, and the private school kids are going to school, and they're getting their tests, and they're in class. It's just
sorry.
Just, so you all right?
Go. I have a
No. That's it. I'm just this just annoys me. It's really shameful. I thought that New York City was poorly run, which of course it is, but San Francisco might actually be worse. And San Franciscans, tell me if I'm wrong. I know that we have a lot of people who listen from the Bay Area. Tell me if I'm missing something, because it could be that I am, and I'm curious to know that. But it just seems to me like this city has just completely mismanaged their response to this pandemic. Obviously, look, it's the federal government. And when it comes down to it, it's the federal government that screwed up, right? But that's not necessarily an out at this point. I mean, San Francisco, Jill, is saying that one of the reasons why they're keeping schools closed is because they don't have enough tests. Well, get the tests, figure it out, right? I mean, we've been doing this dance for 7 months now, people.
It's 100% agree. And the reason I was just chuckling in the middle of what you were saying is certainly not because of what you were saying. Sure. It's because my mom is a retired school teacher, as I probably mentioned on this podcast before, and I was chatting with her last night. So she still talks to a bunch of teachers that she used to work with. And the stories, because as you were saying, you've got half these kids on Zoom and half in person. She was telling me, we were kind of laughing about it just because, the absurdity of the current situation.
It's completely
One
absurd.
of her friends was telling her that there's this app or there's something on Zoom that can change your voice. So she's doing a class and students are answering with voices that aren't theirs, and then and they don't think that she could tell who it is. And so she said, what they're saying is just out of control because they think that they're anonymous, and she's like, guys, I'm on to you.
Yeah.
And then another kid put up a still photo of himself and kind of hit the road for whatever, and then she called on him, and he came back 5 minutes later in a different shirt, took the picture off in a different shirt. Just tells you this is not an easy situation.
Yeah,
Again,
I know.
I'm laughing at just because if you don't laugh, you're gonna cry.
No, it's true. Totally. I know a teacher who said that when they were doing this back in the spring, he was a high school teacher, and he had one kid who was just sitting there smoking a joint in Zoom, and he's like, "What am I going to do? Like, what am I going to like chastise him through the computer?" Like, you're right. You have to laugh.
It's just crazy. No, my mom retired this year. She was like, I have never worked so hard in my whole life as I did in those few months going remote. New York, I just wanted to quickly mention, above 2,000 cases, 2,000 positive cases for the first time in months. The positivity rate ticking back up. It's now 1.62%. So always good to get it below 1%.
Yeah.
Voters, meanwhile, onto the issue of politics, are going to be getting their second and last opportunity to see the two men who are running for president in the same place at the same time. We are talking about tonight's debate. President Trump and Joe Biden facing off in Nashville. NBC's Kristen Welker will be given the thankless job of moderating. The candidates' mics will be cut at certain times to avoid a repeat of the last debate. Carlo, this is potentially the last chance for either candidate to change the course of the campaign. We're less than 2 weeks, of course, until Election Day.
I think barring like an exogenous event, like a James Comey popping up, like what happened in 2016, I would agree with that. But that being said, I mean, given that this is 2020, like it's not exactly a stretch to think something absolutely insane could happen in the next.
No, like it's 100% that something insane is going to happen.
You're right. The aliens will come and it will change everything. We'll find out that one of the candidates was an actual alien. Who knows? But as for tonight, I think it's going to be ugly. The president's advisors have been telling him to sort of go out there, strike a new tone, not to come out guns blazing, and to try and remember that the audience that he needs is more than just his base, and that he needs to speak to them and to deliver a message about why he should be reelected. So I think the thing to watch, the thing that I'll be watching tonight, is to see if he takes that advice. He typically doesn't. He sort of does his own thing, and that has not been good for him, I think, with regard to to these big national profile events where he's being seen by tens of millions of people at once. So we'll see. Anything could happen, right? But once again, I'll just say I don't know why these things have to start so late, because 9 p.m.
I know, please.
9 p.m. Come on, man.
Speaking of outside events, though, on the eve of the final debate, national security officials announced that Iran and Russia had obtained U.S. voter registration data in an effort to influence the election in its final days, although the information they reportedly got a hold of is publicly available to anyone who knows where to look. So the feds say Iran sent spoofed emails to Democratic voters in swing states meant to intimidate them into voting for President Trump. Really kind of a lot of details of this are a little sketch.
Totally. That was my exact feeling when I watched this presser that they did last night. The FBI director and the director of national intelligence. They're saying that Iran did not intend to deter voters, but they're trying to hurt Trump and mobilize support for Biden by angering voters about the president's embrace of the Proud Boys. I don't know what to make of this. The whole thing seems fishy, and I think when you don't see the intel, you just sort of have to go by what these guys are saying at these press conferences. I don't know. I mean, if you believe that the FBI director and the DNI to be, reliable sources of information, then I guess I don't know. I mean, it's not like there's anything to do about this. We sort of knew this was happening anyway. I guess the news is that they're saying Iran is now involved, which is again a little sketch because they're not known to be a particularly an A team when it comes to the sort of hacking that we've seen from Russia and China. They're kind of like they're like a junior varsity team in that.
I feel like you're being unintentionally funny today, Carlo.
Oh yeah, thank you. I take that as a compliment.
Yes, I think that 100%. The director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, he was saying that it was designed to hurt the president, but the emails were apparently from the Proud Boys, which is that kind of that right-wing. I don't even know how to describe them, like the militia organization.
Yeah, right.
That he had mentioned when he said, Proud Boys, stand down, stand by. Anyway, the question is, how does that help Biden? I mean, it was kind of. It was sort of. I mean, I think that that's a real question, whether they're trying to interfere and just sort of sow doubt in the election, fine, but I don't know how that would hurt the president, because they were kind of intimidating voters, saying like, we have information on you, go vote Republican. Like that, it was it was kind of, I don't know.
They didn't do a very good job of explaining, and not to stay on this too long, Joe, but just there's also a big difference between somebody hacking like a voter roll and trying to really sway the outcome of election, and like sending out weird, intimidating emails that are probably going to people's spam folders anyway. Like who cares? I don't know.
Look, it's. If this is happening, we should know. And it's like, why, foreign interference in an election is quite a big deal.
Totally.
And we should know that it's going on. It's just the details and the timing, too, is right after Obama gave this really big rally for Joe Biden. So a lot of it was just, and then reporters weren't able to ask any questions. It was just sort of this written statement. Anyway, moving on to some really big news. A documentary about Pope Francis that just premiered in Rome has shaken up the Catholic Church over comments that the Pope made in support of same-sex civil unions. In the film, Francis says, quote, homosexuals have a right to be part of the family. They are children of God and have a right to a family. What we have to create is a civil union law. That way they are legally covered. End quote. So this is the farthest that he's gone in terms of supporting a legal framework for same-sex couples.
Yeah, this is a big one. Speaking as our podcast resident Catholic, though I should mention a lapsed one at best. This does have the potential to be a very big deal. The Church's official doctrine still opposes civil unions for same-sex couples, and Francis's support of such unions could really upend that position. Though it doesn't necessarily represent a formal change in policy. Just because the Pope says something doesn't mean it's like, sort of becomes church doctrine. But I think it could make it easier for some archdioceses, if not the Vatican itself, to eventually get to a place where they informally change their opposition to same-sex civil unions. Progress is slow in the Catholic Church. It's slow in a lot of religious institutions, but the Roman Catholic Church especially. But it's a step forward from the cool Pope, as he's known in my house, Pope Frank.
I like that, Pope Frankie. Okay, Oxycontin maker Purdue Pharma will be pleading guilty to criminal charges related to how the company marketed the extremely addictive drug that fueled a national opioid crisis. The company will be paying out more than $8 billion in penalties, and the Sackler family, Purdue's wealthy owners, will be personally on the hook for about $225 million.
Yeah, this was sort of, we were expecting a settlement in this case. The settlement with the government, importantly, does not preclude the Sacklers or any former Purdue executives from being criminally charged. So if you take one thing away from this story, it should be that. The bottom line here is that this should sort of start getting the spigot flowing in terms of the thousands of lawsuits in the pipeline against this company over OxyContin and how it was marketed. But it doesn't necessarily mean the end of this story, because criminal charges could and probably will, I think, follow at some point. The drug marketed, and also the company paying doctors to prescribe it. That's a good point. Yeah, it was beyond. You're right. It was beyond.
This was egregious, and it created a serious problem in this country when you think about how many people are addicted to opioids. Okay, on to some tech news. The Quibi experiment is over. The short-form streaming service that wanted to change how we consume video on mobile is shutting down after failing to catch on. The co-founder and media mogul Jeffrey Katzenberg has confirmed the report, saying that he and his partner Meg Whitman, they made, quote, clear-eyed decision to cut their losses 6 months after Quibi launched. The startup raised $1.75 billion in funding, which made it one of the most high-profile media failures in years.
What a disaster this whole thing was. I mean, I really try not to dance on the graves of failures, especially when it comes to media. Like these are people these are our colleagues, right? Technically, I know people who work there who are going to be out of a job as of probably today or tomorrow. And I try and sort of abide by the rule that you don't talk smack about anyone in your own industry. Although I break that rule often, Jill, as you know.
Have you met yourself?
Yes, but I still strong, which has to count for something. But no, look, I mean, Quibi, just a remarkable downfall for this idea and the execution of the idea, right? I mean, they just botched this thing from day one. And Jill, I know you and I have talked about the whole Quibi experiment on the pod for months now. And, have you ever heard anybody tell you to check out a Quibi show, right? Have you ever seen like a meme or a GIF about a Quibi show? Like, could you even name a Quibi show? They just did not do this right. And it's just like such a waste.
It surprised me because they had so much money to create content that people would want to consume. I do think that the timing of the pandemic was quite unfortunate because for anybody who's not familiar, if you're just not even aware of what Quibi is, it was a short form video service. So it was basically very short, like 6-minute. You could get news, you can get full sitcoms, and designed ideally for commuting. So of course it launched
it's all about your phone,
in the middle of a pandemic when everyone stopped commuting. So that timing was unfortunate. One take on it that I found quite interesting was from Peter Kafka in Vox. And I just want to read a little bit of what he said, kind of in defense of Quibi. He's saying he's not defending the concept or the execution, but the model, which is running a media business the old-fashioned way, where you ask people to make something, pay them for it, and then try to resell that work to somebody else. Because there is another version of a media business, what YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook do. And he says, and I don't feel great about that one in 2020. So Katzenberg and Meg Whitman, he says, the CEO that he hired from Hewlett-Packard, they actually paid Hollywood studios, TV networks, and digital shops like Vox Media, which is the one where he works for, to make short videos. And then they tried selling subscriptions to those videos to the consumer. That's the old way to run a media business. And then you can compare that, for example, to social media companies, right? Where you get people to give you stuff for free, get people to consume that stuff for free, and then sell their attention to advertisers. And he says, that's worked really well for YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. So I kind of buy that, right? I mean, there's something to be said for what they tried. At least they tried earnestly, right? They had a concept. They paid people really well for their work. They employed a lot of people that I know. It just didn't stick, probably because just the content wasn't there.
Yeah, it's all about, content is king, as they say, right? But, Jill, I think that the thing is, like, imagine what that, they raised almost $2 billion. Imagine what that money could have done for, like, independent filmmakers or for the local news business. You could have saved God knows how many newspapers with it, or anything else for that matter. I just get annoyed when these big shots start these things and they fail at the execution. I'm just going to give you a very quick example because I don't want to stay on this for much longer. But, Quibi, right? So, you watch it on your phone. They wouldn't allow you to take screenshots of the content, right, as a way to sort of like stop piracy, I guess, which makes sense, I guess, until you realize that that's how media is spread in this day and age, right? You need to think about how many shows you've watched or heard of just because people on social media have been posting, memes from screenshots from the show. So just stuff like that, like they had this idea about this like future product, but they were thinking about it in sort of an old school way. I think that was really one of the main problems when it comes down to it.
And look, they really pulled the plug on this thing right away. It's not like they let this thing drag on.
Yeah, fail fast. That's what they say in Silicon Valley.
Okay, finally, last night, NASA released a video of its OSIRIS-REx spacecraft briefly making contact with the asteroid Ben-U, 200 miles away. 200 million miles away. If it was 200 miles away, we'd have a serious problem on our hands. It's 200 million miles away in outer space. The mission was to do a sort of pogo stick maneuver off the surface of the space rock with the hope that it would kick up and trap enough dirt and rocks for scientists to study. And guess what? It appears to have worked. We're going to find out for sure, though, in the next couple of days.
Yeah, very cool. I linked to the video from NASA on the newsletter today if you want to check it out. This asteroid, Bennu, is almost as old as the universe itself, 4.5 billion years it's been out there, just sort of floating around. And because it's so old, that's important because it could have material in it that contains molecules that were present when life first formed on Earth. So this could potentially be a big deal. But Jill, we talked about this when I did my hit yesterday with you on our morning show. If you ever want to feel good about the state of the world and the state of sort of like American ingenuity specifically, watch the feed from NASA Mission Control when they're doing a mission like this. It's all of these brilliant scientists. They're sitting there together. They're working hand in glove to pull off some like super specific task. And then they do it and they just erupt in cheers. They're so happy. They're so excited. It's like it's a very pure form of entertainment. And it's just something it's like a little treat, a little news treat.
And it's funny because it sometimes feels, because so many of the great space moments have been turned into movies,
Yeah.
and sometimes you watch it and you feel like you're watching a movie, but it's like, no, this is actually happening. This is happening in real time. Yep. I totally agree. And a great way to end this podcast, Carlo. So that's what you need to know for Thursday, October 22nd.
Especially because I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be an annoying day of news. But we'll find out. Bye, guys.